I left for Vietnam on March 27th, 1970. And you might be wondering, how do I remember that? The reason I remember that is this. March 27th, 1970 was an Easter Sunday. And March 27th, 1970, it was snowing. It was snowing here in New Jersey. So on Easter Sunday, I left. I went as an individual. I went to McGuire Air Force Base, and on a civilian transport plane, I was going to Vietnam. And when I graduated from Rutgers University, I was in the ROTC. So I was commissioned a second lieutenant in the United States Army. At that time, the Vietnam War was just starting up, and the government, with new officers, permitted them to continue their schooling. So I had applied and I was accepted to law school over at Villanova University. And I was very, very fortunate that I was able to go through the entire 3 years, then take the bar exam, and then go into active duty. There was such a great need for officers of the junior rank because of all of the fatalities in Vietnam that I'm going right over. When the war first started, they were sending over units. All those people that were in those units were going over together. So you were always going over with someone who you knew. When I went over in 1970, the war was so intensive at that time and they needed officers so badly, they were just sending the officers over by themselves. So I flew out of McGuire Air Force Base, and it's kind of funny, but it was a 27-hour flight. And not only was it a 27-hour flight, but we went over a time zone. So I got to Vietnam before I left New Jersey. I think one of the things that if you spoke to anybody who's been in Vietnam, they will tell you this, that the minute that they opened the door of that plane so that you could walk down the ramp, it was such a ferocious heat and such an overbearing stench. It was a stench of feces. It was a stench of dead animals. It was a stench of rotten food. It was just, you could not comprehend that smell. Then what happened from there is that I was at this place called Tan Son Nhut Airport. I had no idea of where I was going, what was happening. I had no idea. And I will tell you this, I don't think I was ever as frightened or fearful as I was that day. They asked you where you want to serve in the country. They asked you what unit you'd like to be with. I didn't know from Adam about what Vietnam was or where to serve. I just said to myself, geez, I better pick some place where there's not too much fighting going on, because that'd be the best place. So what happened is they selected me because of my specialty. The 11th Armored Cav selected me. It was an armor unit. But they do have artillery officers with the armor unit, because when the armor unit goes out and they get into combat and they need artillery fire to support them or to help them out if they're in a bad situation, you need somebody who can call in the artillery fire for them. I was out in the field with them when we went into Cambodia. When we went into Cambodia, we did more in the effort to end that war than you could possibly imagine. And I firmly believe that if the president didn't remove us by the end of, we went in May 1st, by the end of June, I think the war would have had a different result. Now, what was it like out in the field? Well, it wasn't the greatest, but it was great that I was with an armor unit and we had tracks and we didn't have to walk. And what I did is I brought over here a CD. A friend of mine made a couple of them from what's called Armed Forces Vietnam Radio. And there was actually a radio station in Vietnam that played the contemporary music. So we had to get out of this place. And that was the theme song of Vietnam. We got to get out of here. Being in a field, it was hard because all that was in there was elephant grass, which was sharp as razors. Okay, there was either that or rice fields, which were underwater, and the indigenous animals. There were actually elephants in Vietnam. There were tigers in Vietnam. And there was every bug, snake you could possibly think of. The one snake that they had was what they called the two-step snake. And supposedly the reason they called it the two-step snake was because once you were bitten, all you do is take 2 steps and you're dead. Then they had the animals, the spiders, the leeches. That's why guys smoked so much. Because if you had a leech eating into your arm to take out blood, you take the cigarette, you take a puff on it and get the flame and force the leech to get out of your body. The Viet Cong was captured. And the first thing, it was more important to the American Army to capture a Viet Cong or NVA soldier because the information that you can get from them was invaluable. Okay? It was invaluable. So when we were interrogating a prisoner, one of the guys, what I have is 2 things. One of them is a knife. It's completely rudimentary. It's just, this is what they had for knives. And you can see on one side of it there's an impression there that says Hanoi. That's where it was made. Now this is the knife compared to the knives that we have here. This is a cigarette lighter, which was also made in Hanoi. And this is the rudimentary cigarette lighter that their troops carried. Now, why do I say it was important that you get a prisoner, you interrogate them, and you search them? When we went into Vietnam, one of our field commanders captured a Viet Cong messenger. And they went through his messenger's pouch and they found locations of all of their major areas in Cambodia and communications on how they were going to operate. So it was completely invaluable. It saved the lives of literally hundreds, maybe even thousands of American servicemen because we knew those things.
5, 10, 15, 20, 21 great tobaccos, make 20 wonderful smokes, make your pleasure true, pleasure long, pleasure filter free. Chesterfield, get the king. Chesterfield, king's the thing. If you smoke
This is a cigarette lighter. Okay, everybody that was there smoked. There wasn't anybody that didn't smoke. And one of the reasons everybody smoked was 6 cents. Package of cigarettes, 6 cents. Okay? You had 3 packs of cigarettes, one in one pocket, one in the other pocket, one down there. You know, you smoked one, and you were constantly smoking because you were up for such a long period of time. So what they had is called a unit fund. And every once in a while, they would send some things for troops. And this is just, it says the 11th Armored Cavalry Regiment, Vietnam, Cambodia. So all the guys that were in Cambodia got one of these. We got cans of fruit cocktail. Okay, cans of fruit cocktail was fruit cocktail was the best thing you could possibly get. The most precious thing that you could have. And so what happened is that most of the guys had some brains. They would always see where the medic was and always give the medic the fruit cocktail because they wanted the medic to know who they were and know who their name was, so that when the proverbial stuff hit the fan and they got hit, the medic would run to them. And in Vietnam, you were there for 365 days, and you normally had what they called a short time calendar. You checked off on that calendar every day that was gone by. So you knew how much more time you had left in country. Once you got under 100 days, you were called a double digit. Only 99 days to go, 98 days to go, 97 days to go. That's when the real difficult time was in Vietnam because you were short. And Vietnam was such a dangerous thing. Everybody said it'd be a tragedy if you got killed in Vietnam after serving here 345 days, and it was only 2 weeks until you went home. One of the sad things is the fact that you get to know people while you're there, and you make good friends with them. And you say to them, as soon as we get back to the world, I'll give you that. You don't call it United States, it's back to the world. Or the big PX. When I get back to the big PX, when I get back to the world, we're going to get together. We'll get together. And it just never happens. This is my cousin, Casimir. Casimir came here as an immigrant when he was 16 years of age. He wasn't even a citizen. He volunteered for the Army, and he went into service. He served with the 1st Cavalry Division, and he was killed in Vietnam shortly before he came home. And he was very courageous. He was the worst thing in Vietnam when you're in the infantry. The worst thing is the being point man. And a point man is if you're going with a platoon and the platoon has 25 people in it, you don't all bunch together, because if you get ambushed, you're all done. So what happens is that there's always a point man who walks about 10, 20 yards in front of the platoon. And what happened is that it was an enemy ambush, and he recognized the ambush, and instead of ducking for cover, he engaged the enemy to protect the guys behind him, and he was killed there. And while I was the mayor, I had the honor of, at that time, anybody who was killed in Vietnam, they were suggesting that the local town name bridges after them. We named the bridge over by Passaic, the Casimir Slumiani Bridge. Okay. And I was the last person from our family to see him alive. I took him down to Fort Dix when he was flying to Vietnam. Yeah. I'll always remember that we had every unit had a chaplain, and we would have mass out in the field, and he'd pick up ammunition boxes. He'd throw on it a camouflage tarp, and then everybody would come around him, and he would go through the ritual of the mass. And then what he did was every chaplain always had an aide with him. So he got his aide to go outside and show the 9 guys with the chaplain. And then what he would do is the guy would take 9 pictures, making sure he got a picture of every guy that was at mass. And then the chaplain would say, now you guys got to take this picture and send it home to your parents and tell them that God still remembers you. Obviously, I had a very strong belief in God before I went to Vietnam, but Vietnam only reinforced it. Okay, there are so many incidents that I just that were choices, and they were all good choices I made because something told me which way to go.
Yeah.
And I was very, very proud of the fact that my parents and relatives, everybody was proud of me for my service. And I was proud of serving my country too. I mean, if I had to do it all over again and I knew everything would happen just as it did, I'd do it all over again. There was nothing more important in Vietnam than getting a letter from home. Nana promised me that she would write me a letter every day that I was in Vietnam. And she was right on the money. Every day I was there, I at least got one letter, whether it was a page and a half or a quarter of a page, it was always something. And you don't know how important those things were to us. It was just so encouraging to be in communication with somebody in the States. And it wasn't so much that we didn't want to talk about it, but people didn't want to hear about it. Okay, people really didn't want to hear about it. The mood in the country had changed completely. There were many enlisted guys who came home through San Francisco who were met at the airport with people jeering and calling them baby killers and things. That was the mood of the country. And if you think about it, why was that the mood of the country? That was the mood of the country because these were the guys who didn't want to go. Perspective has changed. And now many times I go, if I have a Vietnam veterans cap on or something, people will say to me, thank you for your service. And it really means a lot. Because back then we didn't get thanked for our service. There was an expression in Vietnam which could probably capsulize anything I could say. And the expression was, you've never really lived until you've almost died. That'll capitalize everything.
Kiss me